Welcome to Workshop Wednesdays.
So today we're going to talk about how to create our own pattern. So let's say you have something that you really like that fits you really well, and so you want to make your own pattern and make your own outfit based off of that one. So this is what we're going to do. This shirt I really like, and so I like the way it fits and the way it hangs. So the first thing I'm going to do is find the middle of the front of the shirt and put my sides together to find the front fold and line everything up nice and neat, best that I can. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I've got this large piece of paper, and because I know I folded this because there's no button-up zippers or anything like that. This is just one piece. It's just a slide on, put on. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to lay it here on this edge like that. Okay, and then I can see this scoops down, but maybe I want to change that a little bit so it scoops down in the front. I think maybe I'm going to make that more straight across, but I want to draw this and allow for this hem. See the seam allowance right here? It's turned twice, so I'm going to have that width 2 times, so I'll just mark that. So I'm going to make the bottom here, and I'm going to draw this, and I'm going to come out here because this is like where it's split here, just to have a little flap opening at the bottom. So I'm going to allow for the seam allowance there and allow that to be turned. So I'm going to allow that space twice also. So I'm going to come out to here. Okay. Now what I can do is I can find this seam, make sure that stays aligned there, and I can flip this over. Okay. I mean, if you really wanted to cut the shirt apart, you could, but I really like the shirt and I want to still wear it, so I'm going to create my own pattern just by doing this. So I took that extra, which is the back, flipped it over. This is the seam. So I want to allow for my seam allowance. Usually it's a 5/8 inch seam. So I'm going to mark this to allow for that. Okay. This one has a bias that is tape that was cut. You can buy solid color bias tape, or you can cut fabric on the bias, which is little strips, and just sew that for under the arm. So this actually is a separate piece, but I do have the thickness in there to allow for the stitching of that, to stitch that on. So I'm going to bring it up. I'm going to allow for that little bit of stitching. Okay. Then I'm going to locate the armhole all the way around. Okay, and in this case, this top, I don't know if you can tell, but this seam is back here. So the seam for this top is actually located behind the shoulder and not on top of the shoulder. You could do it either way. I can always sew the seam right here if I wanted to, or I'm going to draw it to be like this one here. So I'm going to follow this. Okay. In mind, I'm following the bottom one, drawing that around. And then I'm going to go ahead and pull that up. See how that lays. Make sure this stays on that edge. And I can see, oh, see how he's making that straight? Well, it needs to curve. Okay, so that's going to follow the curve of the shoulder. So I'm going to draw it over here too. And keep laying this out. So I'm going to have to move this a little bit so I can get this laid correctly. And see, it actually goes in a little bit. I don't want to have it that narrow, so I think I'm going to leave it a little bit wider and make smaller seams. So my seams would be like here from here. So I make that just a little bit wider. And then it comes down to here, and I'm going to add for the seam allowance. And follow this curve and allow for that seam allowance. Okay, and draw that across there. Now I do need to come back and finish this neckline. Okay. So still align for seam allowance and let that come around. Okay, so that's what this front piece will look like as far as a pattern. This I'm going to mark because when I go to cut it out, I'm going to put it on the fold. Okay, so it will be on the fold and it won't have a seam up the front. Okay, like this one. There's no seam up the front. So I'm going to cut it out on the fold. The other thing is, if this shirt, I really liked it and I've outgrown it and I want it a little bit bigger, I can always come and add and make this a little wider here to allow for the distance here, but keep in mind it might move your armhole over. So what you could do is where your fold is, add the additional part on this side so it adds it in the middle of the front and doesn't affect the armhole and make the armhole wider. Okay? So that would be the front. I would do the same thing for the back. Now, I've tried this on, and I'm able to slip this shirt on without undoing this button and leaving this gap. And I want to leave that like closed when I make mine. So I'm going to leave that and do this on the fold because I can put it on over my head and it still works. It's not tight to put on. So I'm going to do the same thing. So I'm going to line up my back pieces. Okay. Now, I'm kind of running out of my paper right here. I don't know if you can see that. And I just want to move this up a little bit. So, see, I don't have a whole lot of room here. I mean, I could make it work. But instead, I'm going to flip this. And I think I'm going to cut it this direction, or draw it this direction. Now my fabric, I don't want to do that if I have a pattern. It might make your pattern go a different direction, which would not be good. So I'm going to put this one here. I'm going to do the same thing. Okay, I'm going to allow for that seam allowance right here. And to come around. Keep in mind I made those a little bit wider as it comes to connect here. See how low that is? It's not on the shoulder. So I made it a little bit wider. And here. So I want to keep that width over here too. I can draw this back sleeve. Now, if I think this cuts in too much and I don't want it to cut in on the back, then I can make this a little wider also. So you kind of have to decide where do you want it a little bit bigger, or if you like it just the way it is, just draw it as is. Okay? So we're going to come here. I'm going to add just a little bit here. And then I want to make sure I add that allowance for the hem down here at the bottom. Okay, so that was that twice. Okay, and then this here I would mark as the fold. Okay, because there are no seams down the back of this either. The seams are only on the sides. Now, you can do this. This is just another casing, just like it is here. Alright, and then you can do the elastic with the button if you want to do that as well. Or you can keep it simple and very basic, especially if this is your first time sewing something like that. Okay, now I can take this and I can measure with my pencil. And I can measure it to this, and I can see that I didn't make this one near wide enough. So I'm going to come in and make this a little bit wider. So this will line up to this when I sew it. Okay? Now there's one more thing. This shirt you really can't notice as much as some tops, but in here there is a dart. It's in here. So it blends. You can see that dart where it's sewn, and what that allows for some extra fullness here in the front. But see how that blends in? You don't even see it. So on my front, which is this piece, I do need to go back and I need to look at that. So let's turn it inside out and let's see how that's done. So I can see here, it's marked here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to line this back up, okay? And I'm going to look, and underneath here is where it is marked. So here's the top of the dart. This is where it's stitched. I can feel it. And this is where it ends. So I can draw that line where that dart's going to be. Okay? Now, the thing is, I'm going to be pulling this up. So the dart, when you buy a pattern, you'll have a thing like this on here, an allowance on both sides, and a little bump out like that. Okay? Now, when I stitch this, what's going to happen is it's going to raise this part up down here at the bottom. So when I do this, I need to allow and make sure I have enough fabric down here. So when I pull that up, it's okay. I can also add just a little bit here in the armhole because it will pull those two in to create this. Now the reason why you need this little tab is because, here's one I've already cut out, is because when I go to sew this, like this, and sew this across, when this folds over and folds down to sew in, like this, you need that extra for that to line up. Otherwise, you can see my line, it's going to cut into this and the side seam is not going to be straight. So this one's a little harder to see, but what I'm talking about is this piece right here. Okay, so if you can see that piece right there. So in order for that to fold down and lay real nicely in that, it has to be cut out like a little dart. Okay, and allow for that. Okay, so the next step would be to cut these out and then cut it out of fabric and then sew a mock-up. Okay, here's a mock-up that I did. Alright, so I use this fabric. I cut the two pieces out and then I just serged it. But I sewed these darts in here because I wanted to try this on, to slip it on without putting that V in the back of the neck and see how it worked. And I found that this works fine, but to make it a little bit loose, I'm going to make it a little fuller. So the armholes were just right, so I don't want to cut fuller on the sides when I go to cut my next one. Okay, so this is my front. When I go to cut my next one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this away from the edge of the fabric. Okay, so say this is my fabric. Here's my pattern. This would be okay, fit okay, but maybe I want it maybe a little inch extra of fullness because summer's hot and I want it a little looser to, for the air and be cooler. So when I lay my pattern down, I'm just going to move it in from that fold just a little bit, okay, and make that a little looser. Alright, so give it a try. This is just a basic top, and then I'll come back and I'll show you a final one that I get done. Okay, so as you see, I cut those two pattern pieces out now, and then I kind of lined them up to make sure that as these are sewn, so this comes back here because this shoulder is a little different, and make sure that kind of lines up. It's a little big there, so I just come along and I'm just going to trim it a little bit, okay? And so when this is here, this may look like it doesn't line up because it ends here, but remember, this is going to fold down into that dart. So then it will line up once that dart on the front is put in, and the same with the bottom. It will pull up and it will meet. Okay? And then I have it marked for my folds. So you can take your tape measure and you can measure across here. And you can take this, so you can measure like this piece. So I allow for the same allowance, so 10, but it's on the fold, so that would be 20. And then I could take and I can measure this, allow for the seam, and that's 12 and a half. So double it, that would be 25, and 20 would be 45. So that way I can measure around where I'm going to be wearing this and make sure that that's loose enough the way I want. I can always take it in and make it a little tighter if I think it's too loose, but that's a good way to measure and make sure it's going to fit before you cut your fabric. Now when I go to cut this fabric, look, I could lay this on here, and this is a directional fabric. I thought this was a pretty fun print. It'd be fun to do, but it's directional. It all goes the same direction, so I need to make sure that my pieces all go the same direction, that I don't flip this one, because then my design would be upside down from one side to the other, and that wouldn't be good. Okay, so make sure that you keep your pieces going the same direction if it's a directional fabric. All right. Another thing is both of my pieces are on the fold, and currently the only fold I have is right here on this end. This side is the selvage edge, so there's no fold. That means I'd have to have a seam. So to save fabric, if you can, then we can refold this. I mean, I have a little bit of extra, but not enough to do them end to end, like one here and one here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my fabric and I'm going to fold it differently. Okay, so I'm going to take and I'm going to open it up and I'm going to fold it in just enough to fit this piece. Okay, now see, this is a little wide. I can still save a little bit of fabric there. So I'm going to make that a little bit narrower there. Okay, even maybe a little bit more. This will allow you to really save on your fabric. Okay, so now that is my back. So I can cut my back piece out. Okay, I can see if this one will fit, but this won't quite fit. See, it's too wide. But what it's going to allow me to do is to come down here. I can fold it a little bit more down here because my neck is smaller, and it will fit around this piece here. Okay, if that makes sense. So you want to play around with it to make sure you get the best bang for your buck when it comes to fabric, because fabric can be very expensive. It usually always goes on sale, or there's always a coupon. Sometimes you might have to wait a week, or you might have to wait a few days. You know, if you're like me, you get the creative inspiration and you want to do it right now. And so patience, and then you can always get it on sale. Okay, so then I'm going to cut this one out. I'm going to make it this style like the pattern I showed you in the last one, where the shoulder seam is dropped down on the back side. But I want to go back to this other one. Move this out of the way. So this other one that I was showing you out of my sample fabric, okay, and I tried it on and I got the darts on it and everything, but I just wanted it a little looser since it was summer. I didn't want it to be too tight. So, you know, instead of wasting the fabric or going by another big old chunk of fabric, I decided to add to my design. Because I got to thinking, shorts all the time, you see exercise shorts and stuff, and they have these extra little strips on the sides. I decided, hey, I'm going to do that on this shirt. So let me turn it right side out. Okay, and once this is completed, here's the front and the darts. You can kind of see where those are. Once this is completed, and ironed, you know what? That's really not even going to show. That's going to be down the side. And it gave me a little bit extra so I don't even waste this fabric and I don't have to start over. It's just a designer's way to be creative with it. So I'm going to try that and see if it works. I'm not adding anything except a little bit of time because I had already made this as my mock-up. Okay, so the thing left for me, I will come back and serge all these edges. I've serged the bottom, but then I added this, so I'll come back and serge all those seams so it'd be a nice finished seam. So I have all my strips, okay, and so these strips were cut on a bias, so that means like the diagonal of the fabric at an angle, because if you can see how the flamingo in this one is little parts of it. This one maybe you can see their little heads better. So this is the way the fabric was, so I had to cut it this way. And the reason you do that, because if I go like this with my fabric, there's no give. Straight like that if I would have cut it straight. But when I cut it at an angle, it allows it to stretch. Okay? That's important when you go sewing around these curved areas such as the neckline or the armhole. Okay? And there's little tools that you can feed this through, and this will turn this and make it a nice little bias tape. I don't have any of those handy right at the moment. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the iron and I'm going to fold this in on both sides like that. Okay, and iron it nice and flat. And then that will show me where that piece is. I'll be able to come in. I always start at the seam down here under the arm. And I will be able to stitch. It's kind of, I use stitch in the ditch a lot. My mom, my grandmother taught me that. But for this case, when it's iron fold, it would be stitching in that crease or that fold. And I will stitch that all the way around the armhole. And then this is already ironed down so that when I turn that, okay, so that's stitched there. And when I turn that, that iron piece will already be turned, and all I have to do is then top stitch that, and it's a nice finished edge, just like the shirt like I showed you. Let me grab that. So you'll see it'll be this nice finished casing right there. Okay, so see there's only one seam or one stitched seam here, not two. That's because that was the last stitch. This piece here is where I was talking about where you sew it right sides together. Okay, so right sides of fabrics together, and then you sew along that. Once you've done that, you're going to turn it. You'll have your casing folded under, and then you fold that in, and then you just top stitch, and you have this nice top stitch. Okay, and that's pretty simple. You know, we didn't put the little slit in the back and have to put the casing there with the little elastic or the button. You can. Buttons can be kind of expensive, but if you're just trying for the first time, don't go to that expense. Just to see if you can find a shirt that you like that will just slip over and practice sewing, especially if this is one of your first times sewing. Give it a try. So as you can see, here's the final product. You can see that I've got the bias sewn on around the neckline and around the sleeves. So those are all finished. Okay, and you can see I made the back, pull it up a little bit. So I made the back just a little bit longer than the front on this one. And then this is the one I talked about, you know, just, it was the sample that I was just mocking up to see if my pattern was good. And I decided to use it anyway and put the little, pretty much like a little gusset down the side. But if you look close, you can hardly see it. It's not that noticeable. So when I'm wearing it, I don't think anybody will really notice. So I'm able still to utilize the fabric. I'm not out any expense. And I can still have a finished top to wear. Okay? Give it a try. So I'm wearing the shirt that was the original sample one that I had made just to test my pattern to see how it fit. And then, if you recall, I went back and added the little gussets on the sides. They don't even hardly show.
I'm super excited about this one. I love it. I have the other one that we made the other pattern here with the shoulder seams in the back. And so I've sewn it together. I've held it up. I'm really liking it. It's not quite finished. I got to put all the bias around the neck and the sleeves and then the hem and the bottom. I did make it a little bit longer because I'm going to go back and make little slits at the bottom on the sides, just so when I sit down, it just kind of flares out instead of bunches up. So I'm really excited about this. I hope you get excited about the ones that you're going to try to make. I also went and got more fabric, so I'm really excited about these. There's jasmine, Moana, more jasmine, and flamingos. I am a big flamingo fan, so I thought this would brighten up my summer, make it a little more fun and nice and cool, and it's a design that I knew I already liked. Enjoy. Have a great time.